comparatively easy time of it. I'd always been fond of hunting, and I now had a good opportunity to gratify my ambition in that direction, as I had plenty of spare time on my hands. In this connection, I will relate one of my bear hunting adventures. One day, when I had nothing else to do, I saddled up an extra Pony Express horse and, arming myself with a good rifle and a pair of revolvers, struck out for the foothills of Laramie Peak for a bear hunt. Riding carelessly along and breathing the cool and bracing autumn air which came down from the mountains, I felt as only a man can feel who is roaming over the prairies of the far west, well armed and mounted on a fleet and gallant steed. The perfect freedom which he enjoys is in itself a refreshing stimulant to the mind as well as to the body. Such indeed were my feelings on this beautiful day as I rode up the valley of the Horseshoe. Occasionally, I scared up a flock of sage hens or a jackrabbit. Antelopes and deer were almost always in sight in any direction. But as they were not the kind of game I was after on that day, I passed them by and kept on towards the higher mountains. The further I rode, the rougher and wild became the country, and I knew that I was approaching the haunts of the bear. I did not discover any, however, although I saw plenty of tracks in the snow. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my horse having become tired, and myself being rather weary, I shot a sage hen, and dismounting, I unsaddled my horse and tied him to a small tree, where he could easily feed on the mountain grass. I then built a little fire, and broiling the chicken and seasoning it with salt and pepper, which I had obtained from my saddlebags, I soon sat down to a genuine square meal, which I greatly relished. After resting for a couple of hours, I remounted and resumed my upward trip to the mountains, having made up my mind to camp out that night rather than go back without a bear, which my friends knew I had gone for. As the days were growing short, night soon came on, and I looked around for a suitable camping place. While thus engaged, I scared up a flock of sage hens, 2 of which I shot, intending to have one for supper and the other for breakfast. By this time it was becoming quite dark, and I rode down to one of the little mountain streams where I found an open place in the timber suitable for a camp. I dismounted, and after unsaddling my horse and hitching him to a tree, I prepared to start a fire. Just then, I was startled by hearing a horse whinnying further up the stream. It was quite a surprise to me, and I immediately ran to my animal to keep him from answering, as horses usually do in such cases. I thought that the strange horse might belong to some roaming band of Indians, as I knew of no white men being in that portion of country at that time. I was certain that the owner of the strange horse could not be far distant, and I was very anxious to find out who my neighbor was before letting him know that I was in the vicinity. I therefore resaddled my horse, and leaving him tied so that I could easily reach him, I took my gun and started out on a scouting expedition up the stream. I had gone about 400 yards when, in the bend of the stream, I discovered 10 or 15 horses grazing. On the opposite side of the creek, a light was shining high up in the mountain bank. Approaching the mysterious spot as cautiously as possible, and when within a few yards of the light, which I discovered came from a dugout in the mountainside, I heard voices, and soon I was able to distinguish the words, as they proved to be in my own language. Then I knew that the occupants of the dugout, whence the voices proceeded, were white men. Thinking that they might be a party of trappers, I boldly walked up to the door and knocked for admission. The voices instantly ceased, and for a moment a death-like silence reigned inside. Then there seemed to follow a kind of hurried whispering, a sort of consultation, and then someone called out, "Who's there?" "A friend and a white man," I replied. The door opened, and a big, ugly-looking fellow stepped forth and said, "Come in." I accepted the invitation with some degree of fear and hesitation, which I endeavored to conceal, as I saw that it was too late to back out, and that it would never do to weaken at that point, whether they were friends or foes. Upon entering the dugout, my eyes fell upon 8 as rough and villainous-looking men as I ever saw in my life. 2 of them I instantly recognized as teamsters who had been driving in Lou Simpson's train a few months before and had been discharged. They were charged with the murdering and robbing of a ranchman, and having stolen his horses, it was supposed that they had left the country. I gave them no signs of recognition, however, deeming it advisable to let them remain in ignorance as to who I was. It was a hard crowd, and I concluded that the sooner I could get away from them, the better it would be for me. I felt confident that they were a band of horse thieves. "Where are you going, young man? And who's with you?" asked one of the men, who appeared to be the leader of the gang. "I am entirely alone. I left Horseshoe Station this morning for a bear hunt, and not finding any bears, I determined to camp out for the night and wait till morning," said I. "And just as I was going to camp, a few hundred yards down the creek, I heard one of your horses whinnying, and then I came to your camp." I was thus explicit in my statement in order, if possible, to satisfy the cutthroats that I was not spying upon them, but that my intrusion was entirely accidental. "Where's your horse?" demanded the boss thief. "I left him down the creek," I answered. They proposed going after the horse, but I thought that that would never do, as it would leave me without any means of escape, and I accordingly said, in hopes to throw them off the track, "Captain, I'll leave my gun here and go down and get my horse, and come back and stay all night." I said this in as cheerful and as a careless manner as possible, so as to not arouse their suspicions in any way, or lead them to think that I was aware of their true character. I hated to part with my gun, but my suggestion of leaving it was a part of the plan of escape which I had arranged. If they have the gun, thought I, they would surely believe that I intended to come back. But this little game did not work at all, as one of the desperadoes spoke up and said, "Jim and I will go down with you after your horse, and you can leave your gun here all the same, as you'll not need it." "All right," I replied, for I could certainly have said nothing else. It became evident to me that it would be better to trust myself with 2 men than the whole party. It was apparent that from this time on, I would have to be on the alert for some good opportunity to give them the slip. "Come along," said one of them, and together we went down the creek, and soon came to the spot where my horse was tied. One of the men unhitched the animal and said, "I'll lead the horse." "Very well," said I. "I've got a couple of sage hens here. Lead on." I picked up the sage hens, which I had killed a few hours before, and followed the man who was leading the horse, while his companion brought up the rear. The nearer we approached the dugout, the more I dreaded the idea of going back among the villainous cutthroats. My first plan of escape having failed, I now determined upon another. I had both of my revolvers with me, the thieves not having thought necessary to search me. It was not quite dark, and I purposely dropped one of the sage hens and asked the man behind me to pick it up. While he was hunting for it on the ground, I quickly pulled out one of my Colt's revolvers and struck him a tremendous blow on the back of the head, knocking him senseless to the ground. I then instantly wheeled around and saw that the man ahead, who was only a few feet distant, had heard the blow and had turned to see what was the matter, his hand upon his revolver. We faced each other at about the same instant, but before he could fire, as he tried to do, I shot him dead in his tracks. Then, jumping on my horse, I rode down the creek as fast as possible, through the darkness and over the rough ground and rocks. The other outlaws in the dugout, having heard the shot which I fired, knew there was trouble, and they all came rushing down the creek. I suppose, by the time they reached the man whom I'd knocked down, that he had recovered and hurriedly told them of what had happened. They did not stay with the man whom I shot, but came on in hot pursuit of me. They were not mounted, and were making better time down the rough canyon than I was on horseback. From time to time, I heard them gradually gaining on me. At last, they had come so near that I saw that I must abandon my horse. So I jumped to the ground and gave him a hard slap with the butt of one of my revolvers, which started him on down the valley, while I scrambled up the mountainside. I had not ascended more than 40 feet when I heard my pursuers coming closer and closer. I quickly hid behind a large pine tree, and in a few moments they all rushed past me, being led on by the rattling footsteps of my horse, which they heard ahead of them. Soon I heard them firing at random at the horse, as they no doubt supposed I was still seated on his back. And as soon as they had passed me, I climbed further up the steep mountain, and knowing that I had given them the slip, and feeling certain that I could keep out of their way, I at once struck out for Horseshoe Station, which was 25 miles distant. I had hard traveling at first, but on reaching lower and better ground, I made good headway, walking all night and getting into the station just before daylight, footsore, weary, and generally played out. I immediately waked up the men of the station and told them of my adventure. Slade himself happened to be there, and at once organized a party to go out and hunt up the horse thieves. Shortly after daylight, 20 well-armed stage drivers, stock tenders, and ranchmen were galloping in the direction of the dugout. Of course, I went along with the party, notwithstanding I was very tired and had had hardly any rest at all. We had a brisk ride, and arrived in the immediate vicinity of the thieves' rendezvous at about 10 o'clock in the morning. We approached the dugout cautiously, but upon getting in close proximity to it, we could discover no horses in sight. We could see the door of the dugout standing wide open, and we then searched up to the place. No one was inside, and the general appearance of everything indicated that the place had been deserted, that the birds had flown. Such indeed proved to be the case. We found a new-made grave, where they evidently buried the man whom I had shot. We made a thorough search of the whole vicinity, and finally found their trail going southeast in the direction of Denver. As it would have been useless to follow them, we rode back to the station, and thus ended my eventful bear hunt. We had no more trouble for some time from horse thieves after that. During the winter of 1860 and the spring of 1861, I remained at Horseshoe, occasionally riding Pony Express and taking care of stock.